Hi, my name is Matthew Hankler. I'm a contractor here in Richmond, Virginia, and I'd like to talk to you about maintaining and restoring old brick houses. So a lot of these old houses are, well, as you all know, over 100 years old, and they actually utilized lime mortar in the bricks. And I'm going to show you how I mix up some lime mortar and do some repointing today. You start off with the sand. I like to get concrete sand and then filter it, because regular mortar sand that you get is a little too fine in terms of matching the consistency of the old sand that was used. So I like to just filter the sand, and then I mix this filtered concrete sand with the finer mortar sand that I'll show you next. And this is the brick mortar sand. You can see it's much finer. So a mix of these two sands, the filtered concrete sand and brick mortar sand, is just about perfect to match the original mortar sand that went in the walls. These can both be purchased at Riverside Brick, as well as this. This is St. Alabaster's Pure and Natural Hydraulic Lime, NHL 3.5. This is concurrent with the lime that would have originally been used in these old brick houses. So using this and a mixture of sand almost identically matches the properties of the existing mortar, which is perfectly formulated for the old soft bricks. So using this with these in these old 100-year-old plus houses is just about perfect, especially if you can tell that you have the old lime mortar. So what we're going to do is take one part of this, so I'm doing one scoop here in a mixing tray. Now we're also going to use some color pigments. So I find for about 1 liter of lime, about a tablespoon and a half of the dark brown, and then a tablespoon and a half of this burnt umber, and then just a little bit of this sienna color, raw sienna. I found this works really well to match the color of this mortar that I'm working on currently. You can adjust the ratios of the pigments to match the color of the mortar. Then what you do is you mix the pigments in with the dry lime before adding the sand or the water. We can add our sand. So again, I like to use half and half a brick mortar sand, and there's two colors of brick mortar sand generally available. This is the yellow, and then there's also a white, but you typically want the yellow because it'll help match better. If you didn't use color pigments, this mortar would come out brilliant white, sort of like snow colored white, just like whitewash. In fact, this lime, creation of the lime has a byproduct that's used as whitewash. It is whitewash. So we add the sand, and the classic ratio of sand to lime mortar, this mortar here, is 1 part lime, 3 parts sand. So we're going to go ahead and add 3 parts sand here. Do 1.5 of that sand, and 1.5 of this sand. you mix this up dry. And then we'll add the water. So now that the water is dry mixed, we're going to add some water. You don't want to add too much water, just the right amount. So I'm going to add some more. Now you chop the mortar and water together, like so. You want to be careful. Once the water gets in the mortar, it can splash, and that water will stain surfaces. So you have to be careful at this stage. The ingredients are active and can stain, and it's not good to get on your skin either. So we mix this all up to about this consistency. So this here is going to be way too wet. You don't want the mortar like this. It's going to run off your trowel. It's not going to stay together when you're trying to put it into the wall. This over here is probably too dry. You can see it's crumbly and not cohesive. So what you want, ideally, is a mix in between. You want it to be workable, but not too wet. And that way you can push it into a trowel and it'll hold on. So you can then insert it into the wall and work with it. If it's too wet, again, it can make a real mess, smearing all over the face of the bricks. And if it's too dry, it's not going to cooperate on your trowel. So here's the section of wall that we're going to be doing. You're going to want to chisel at least an inch deep of the mortar. Mortar like this that's already more or less eroded away over 100 years isn't far from being ready to be repointed. You can fill all the way back in to the gaps. You want to fill all the space, but right now there's a thin layer of the old mortar and sand that's still on the bricks. So what you're going to want to do is clean that off thoroughly. I like to use a shop vac to make sure that the bricks are clean. Otherwise it's going to act like flour on a rolling board, and your new mortar isn't going to stick well. Now that I've vacuumed the mortar off, I'm going to want to add water because these old bricks are probably dry, and it also helps clean the surfaces between the bricks that we're going to be putting the new mortar into. You don't want the bricks to be really dry because the moisture in the mortar can get sucked out of the mortar when you put it in these old bricks, and that will decrease the bond strength between the mortar and the bricks. So we're just going to pre-wet the bricks a little bit. Then what you do is you take your mortar, and I like to pat it down so that it's about the right width for the mortar joint that I'm going to be inserting it into. So you cut it down, strike it off. I always make sure to clean the back of my trowel so I don't get any mortar on the bricks that way. And then here's the joint that I just cleaned and wet. And I like to just set the trowel on the edge of the brick so that I have a nice place to slide the mortar off and just pack it all the way back. So this again will stain the bricks, which the staining you can remove with a little bit of vinegar or with the sponge while it's still wet. But ideally you can keep the mortar off the face of the bricks as you insert it into the joints. That way you don't have to do as much cleanup. So you want to make sure that it's pushed all the way back, and then once it is, I like to strike it off, and that's it. When it dries, it's going to dry a lot lighter. Like I said, the byproduct of this lime mortar is whitewash, so when it dries, it will dry much lighter than this. So it's better, if you are trying to match the color, it's better to put it in and see that it's a little darker than the surrounding mortar. So when it dries the right color. And that's about it. That's how I repoint historic bricks with accurate lime mortar for the consistency of the old handmade bricks. So this is the final result. You have, this is the new lime mortar next to the old. And I've color matched it and recessed it behind the face of the brick slightly. That way, it blends right in and it's relatively unnoticed. This is the lime mortar, the exact same stuff as the old, so it shouldn't have any issues with the bricks getting crushed by it or it expanding into the bricks. It's essentially the perfect thing to put into these old lime mortar soft brick homes.